Now, yesterday I made a video where I briefly analyzed the information that we had about the tragic Jeju flight 2216 that skidded off the relatively short runway of Muan airport and crashed into an embankment and bursted into flames. The video got a lot of attention, quite a bit of negative attention as well, but especially a lot of opinions. Over 3,000 comments under that video. Opinions of not only armchair flight simulator pilots like me, but also real 737 pilots. And there were also dozens of comments saying that this was a planned event, some sort of conspiracy, but we'll get to that later. And we now know at least a little bit more information, which is why I thought it would be important to make a second, more comprehensive video about this crash and all the things that we already know went wrong and all the things that even real pilots are a bit confused about. Now, it is exactly 8:54 when ATC clears Jeju Air flight 2216, the airplane of registration Hotel Lima 8088, to land down there at runway 01. The airplane is on final approach after its 4-hour and 30 flight from Bangkok in Thailand. The airplane had departed very early in the morning at 2 a.m., kind of a red-eye flight. Now, exactly 3 minutes after being granted landing clearance, the ATC gives out a warning. There's bird activity in the area, which turns out to be quite prophetic because, yes, only 2 minutes later, the pilots report a bird strike. Y'all may know this phone video right here, which actually captures the moment of the plane being struck by a bird, and you can even see some compressor stall, especially in the second engine right here, engine number 2. The very right engine we have damaged here in the flight simulator as well. Now, it is up to speculation as of right now how much damage there was to the engine number 2 as well as the engine number 1. We can see for a very brief moment that even engine number 1 is affected and hit by a bird. Now, after this bird strike, the pilots decided to go around with the intent, of course, to climb. You can tell that here through the ADS-B data. Here is the final approach. Here is where I reckon the bird strike might have happened, and here is where an attempt to climb happened. Now, interestingly, at 500 feet, as we know, the tracking data cuts out. It is now 9 in the morning, and as far as we can assume, the pilot sent out a Mayday signal, put up the landing gear, put up the flaps, overflies the airport, and at 9 a.m. requests to land down there at runway 19er, do a 180-degree teardrop maneuver. Now, the situation goes really fast. Just after 2 minutes, the airplane touches down at runway 19er. But not here at the touchdown zone, but much later. The airplane passes almost half of the runway and apparently touches down 1,200 meters behind threshold without its landing gear down or without the flaps down. An interesting fact we'll get to later is that the airplane had its right reverser out. We will get to that later. Either way, 34 seconds after touchdown, the air traffic control alerts the crash bell at Airport Fire Rescue Unit. 20 seconds later, the Airport Fire Rescue Unit completes deploying fire rescue equipment, and 5 seconds later, the airplane crashes into the embankment. A tragic crash where only 2 people, 2 crew members of the 181 occupants of this airplane survived, marking the deadliest aviation disaster in South Korea ever. Now, as always with aviation incidents like this, there's not one single cause. There's always a causal chain, always a multitude of things that cause such a crash. Number 1, a very unsafe airport. I mean, we have discussed that the airport runway of Muan Airport is only 2,800 meters long, which isn't the longest runway in the world, but very much long enough for a 737 to land. The bigger problem at the Muan International Airport, though, is the bird concentration. Here's the chart that I found yesterday. The airplane arrived into runway 01 and overflew a feeding and roosting area of birds. Not only that, in the approach path, there even is a common transfer route to another roosting area of birds. In fact, the Muan Airport has always been a bit controversial in South Korea. There's always been concerns about the airport exposure to bird strike risk. The Muan region of South Korea is very much known for its population of migratory birds in the winter because of the so-called Muan tidal flats. They serve as a vital stopover for over 12,000 1,000 birds annually. While the airport was being planned, bird strikes were found to be a significant risk, which is why measures like sound cannon lasers and warning lights were recommended for the airport. But according to this news website, the implementation has been delayed reportedly due to the ongoing runway extension work, something I had talked about yesterday. Yes, the runway is being extended by at least 700 meters. There is construction work right now at runway 19er. According to official airport documentation, the Muan airport strives to prevent bird strikes by implementing both non-lethal techniques, gas cannons and playback of distress calls, lethal techniques like live ammunition shooting during airport operation hour. I don't know what strives means here in this case. We will have to see what the South Korean government thinks is an appropriate action for this very problematic airport indeed. Maybe there's the possibility of moving the feeding and roosting area for birds. Now, the biggest scandal of Muan Airport, though, is what is situated just behind runway 01, the very runway that the 737 overran. And that is, of course, that some people suggest is either made out of concrete or just plain dirt. Anyway, sturdy enough to completely destroy a 737-800 when it crashes into it. On this embankment, there is the localizer antennas for the instrument landing system. And let me tell you, this is, of course, understandably, a very unusual design for an airport. Usually, localizer antennas, the red ones, are placed behind the runway on a metal construction, or just put on stills like here. This is an appropriate localizer design, which ensures that if an airplane overruns, it can merely crash through the metal construction without much damage, as it happened here, or happened here. See, the truth is, overruns happen, and they happen all the time, which is why it's important for runways to have an appropriate runway safety area, which is the area behind or in front of the runway and also next to it. Right now, the ICAO requires a 150-meter long runway area, which apparently is given here at the airport. There's a clear way of 200 meters, but the recommendation is at least 390 meters of runway safety area, which is not given here, especially considering the relatively short runway. This could have been implemented. But of course, the biggest controversy is this dirt block, which is just 140 meters behind the displaced threshold. And this is something I truly have never seen before. This will definitely be a big investigation. No one really knows why would you build that there. Also, the obstacle is not mentioned here in the obstacle chart. If I made the obstacle chart, I would have probably noted that down. There is a big dirt block behind the runway. Don't crash into it. I don't understand why it's there. Maybe this is an older structure that was just conveniently repurposed. Maybe this serves as a minor flood protection, or as a noise barrier, or as a blast protection barrier. Although I'm not quite sure who to protect from the blast. Maybe, okay, here's the road right at the end of runway 01. We can even see the localizer antenna that the airplane crashed into. Maybe there is the danger of this brick wall crashing down when jet blast happens. I'm not sure, but we can say that there would have been more survivors if this thing wasn't built the way it is. This is why I'm such a big fan of the so-called EMIS safety bed that you can find at airports that don't have a lot of space behind the runway. The interesting thing about this Muan airport is that it only recently opened for international flights. For 17 years, there were only domestic flights, and for example, the Bangkok to Muan route only started from December 8th, leading people to think that this airport might have not been prepared properly for international operation. I'm very interested in seeing what the consequences of this crash will be for this very poorly built airport. Now we're going to be a little bit more speculative and talk about number 2, pilot errors. Now, I do not believe that it is a controversial opinion to say that there could have been different ways to deal with this situation that would have had a better outcome. My big question is why would you go around in this kind of case? See, we just had a bird strike. The second engine definitely is impacted. What do we do now? The Skybrary has an answer for it. Look, an aircraft is hit by birds while on final approach to land. Should the pilot continue the approach or initiate a go-around? Short answer is that usually it is advisable to continue the approach and land, because I do not know what is wrong with my aircraft and I do not know if it will stay in the air. And my hypothesis is that if they hadn't gone around, it would have been possible for them to land at the airport. Now granted, I'm not a 737 pilot at all, and I do not know about the emergency procedures of the Jeju Airlines. but it is most advisable to continue an approach when you have a bird strike. And I can almost say the decision to make a go-around I can almost not get behind. And I can very much guarantee that this go-around was later on regretted by the flight crew, because they attempted a maneuver that is very unusual for a big airplane like this and I've never seen before. Yes, the teardrop maneuver. Now, aside from that, of course there's lots of speculation that I made in yesterday's video as well. Why did the airplane land with the landing gear not out, with the flaps fully up? The mainstream assumption is that due to the engine failure, which is assumed to be even dual, the engine-driven hydraulic pumps failed. Let's go ahead and simulate that. But this is a modern jet airplane. Of course we have redundancy. See, I'm not super familiar with the 737 type. All I know is that the 737 has 3 different hydraulic systems. The system A and the system B, and also the standby electric pump. Now, right now, in the worst case, we've lost engine number 1 and engine number 2, but there's also the electrically driven pump, which is why I'm able to put out the landing gear right now. Although, yeah, maybe you see it, it's a lot slower. The electrically driven pump is a lot less powerful. Yes, lots of people are indeed suggesting that the plane would have had enough hydraulic backup to put the landing gear down. And in fact, the plane had enough hydraulic power during the go-around to put the flaps up fully and the landing gear up fully. And you know, something I said yesterday, even if all the hydraulics, system A, system B, system standby failed, you'd be able to put out the landing gear using the panel right here, although that is very inconveniently placed. Now, in the beginning of the video, you could see how quickly everything went. The crew decided to land as fast as possible, and that decision depends on how broken your airplane is. And lots of people doubt that the airplane was super broken at all. See, here is the landing clip. What do we hear? We hear engine noise. In fact, we hear reverse thrust. This is what the reverse thrust sounds like, and something we also see is the reverse thrust is out. And this raises quite a few questions around pilots. First of all, we learn at least one engine is running, and I presume the right one, because it is at least producing reverse thrust noise. Which is weird, because it is the engine that ingested most birds, because it had the compressor stall in the beginning. We're talking about engine number 2 right here. Lots of people suggest that the crew accidentally had turned off the engine number 1, which after the bird strike was less impacted, and then flew with the second engine, the one that was more impacted. That is a pilot error that is very much speculative and that I take with a large grain of salt. But one big thing we learn from this photo alone is about the hydraulic system. See, the reverse thrust deployment on the 737 works solely through hydraulics. And we can also see that only the right engine has its reverse thrust deployed. Now look at this hydraulic chart, where we can see the system A hydraulics powers the left thrust reversers, and the system B hydraulic powers the right thrust reversers. And what do we know? The right thrust reversers went out, the left one did not. So let's talk about total failure. Both the electric and the engine-driven pumps don't work. Of the system A, neither does the standby reservoir. From the clip we can tell the system B was running. Problem is, the system B does not do the main landing gear. It only does the alternate retract, although it does put out the spoilers and the flaps. What I'm trying to say is that they had some hydraulics running, and if they had followed proper procedure, there would have no problem in retracting the landing gear. But also, that if you have one engine running, there also wouldn't have been a problem going around. My assumption for this quick teardrop maneuver was that they had some sort of a dual engine failure, but it is clearly not. The airplane still had some power in it, which is why lots of people presume that the big pilot error here was panicking in the cockpit. That instead of investing time in proper decision making, they really wanted to put down the airplane as quickly as possible, which eventually led to this immense overrun. A contributing fact to that might have been number 3, pilot fatigue. This one we cannot be sure about, and we can only assume. See, the 15-year-old 737-800 of the registration Hotel Lima 8088 flew a lot. Practically 24/7, you could say. The flight history of this airplane is pretty crazy. Just look at the flights that happened 30 hours before the crash. On the 28th of December at 2 a.m., the plane flew from Kota Kinabalu to Muan. 2 hours hours later, it flew from Muan to Nagasaki. 50 minutes later, it flew from Nagasaki to Muan. 1 hour later, it flew from Muan to Taipei. 1 hour later, it flew from Taipei back to Muan. 1 hour later, it flew from Muan to Bangkok. And 1 hour later, it flew from Bangkok to Muan, where it eventually crashed. As this is a low-cost airline, we can assume that the flight crew could have been overworked. We don't know what the rotations of the crew were, but my assumption is that the flight crew operated the flight from Muan to Bangkok and back, where they would have accumulated 12 hours on duty. That is something that the airline should have to investigate. Maybe this is totally wrong, but I reckon pilot fatigue could be a big contributing factor to the crash. Now, something I don't want to speculate on is, the airplane's fault on this crash. I mean, after all, it is a Boeing, and we all know Boeing problems. I mean, yesterday I mentioned that the very same airplane that we're talking about had an emergency landing just 2 days earlier, but now it's turned out that that was just a medical emergency. We cannot rule out at all that the Boeing airplane somehow contributed to this crash, but I don't think it was the leading factor. What I think is pretty crazy is the amount of conspiracy theories in my comments. Just 2 hours ago, regarding this accident, Korean MBC broadcasting company, the most anti-government pro-North Korea Kim's regime, allegedly filmed in real time at the emergency landing site of the accident. It is believed to have been filmed by MBC in anticipation of the tragedy. I don't even know what all these abbreviations mean. This was a planned event. Watch the camera panning. The camera crew was already on the rooftop of the building, and the day before closing, there was a massive sell-off of the stock of the airline. I could not find any official information about stock sales on the airline. Apparently, someone sold quite a lot of stocks of Jeju Air on the day before it crashed, but that has to be confirmed. Currently, the South Korean government has been paralyzed by the 29th impeachment by the far less democratic majority in the National Assembly, where all the key posts of the government has been removed, including the military. And while I don't doubt these people's sincerity, I think it's a bit disrespectful. I mean, the evidence is quite clear that those were birds. We're talking about a very bird-infested airport. And to say that these were some Chinese spy drones that were aimed at crashing the airplane makes very little sense to me. But I don't know. We will have to see this situation unfold. Thank you, everybody, for watching this video. And once again, my biggest condolences for all the people that perished yesterday on this horrible tragedy of a flight. When I woke up yesterday and heard the news, I was in utter shock. And I can't believe this happened. And we need to stop this from happening in the future by what we can presume is probably pilot training and by protecting pilots from fatigue.